So my presentation today is about some work we've been doing at the GRCA to try and improve the communication of groundwater data in some fairly simple platforms and essentially trying to make, I'm going to say, sad little hydrographs like this a little bit more interesting and a little bit more exciting. So this really isn't much of a technical talk overall, but it's more about our work in progress to try and improve groundwater communication and overall availability. Okay, so starting with an overview of the Grand River watershed. So it is the largest watershed region in southern Ontario, and it's roughly the same size as Prince Edward Island. I recently found this out and thought it was fairly interesting. It has a population of approximately 1 million people, and it's home to 39 municipalities and 2 First Nation territories, 6 nations of the Grand River Territory and the Mississaugas of the First Credit Nation. And for groundwater, we have a lot of groundwater in the watershed. We have 49 municipal drinking water systems overall, which are shown in purple on this map, and over 41,000 wells overall too, which are shown in blue. So it's substantial. Over 70% of the municipal water supply comes from groundwater wells across the watershed. And even though I don't work there, I always think this is an interesting fact that the region of Waterloo and the city of Guelph are among the largest groundwater-based municipal systems in Canada. So groundwater resources at a glance. So we have significant resources both in the bedrock and in the overburden. So in the bedrock, we have the Guelph Formation, which is then underlined by the gas port, which is just peeking out to the east. The gas port hosts significant municipal resources, both for the city of Guelph, the city of Cambridge, Fergus, and Elora. The Guelph Formation, because it's a little shallower, hosts a lot of private domestic supply. And then moving over to the overburden aquifers, we have, again, significant resources, very complex. We have the Orangeville Moraine to the north, Waterloo Moraine through the central portion of the watershed, which also supplies the region of Waterloo with some municipal supply. We have the Periscalt Moraine trending through the eastern central portion of the watershed. And then the Norfolk Sand Plain to the southwest, which is a large unconfined aquifer that is also extensively used. So that said, this is very similar to a map that Abigail showed earlier, so I'll speak to this a little bit as well. So the overburden in the watershed is very complex, and we've been fortunate to work with the OGS over the past 20 years, I'd say, mapping the three-dimensional sediments. Oh, so anyways, it was first completed by Andy Bites, who worked in the region of Waterloo in the early 2000s. He then moved over to work and complete work in the Brantford Woodstock area. During that time as well, the OGS partnered with the GRCA to map the Dundas Valley. It's a buried bedrock valley that trends through the central portion of the watershed, and also investigate the hydrogeological properties of the Dundas Valley. Then we had around 2010, I'd say, Abigail move into the area, Abigail Burt. She worked on the Orangeville area to the north, the Niagara area to the south, and most recently, as Abigail was just talking about, working in the Guelph area between the Orangeville and Waterloo Marine study areas. So in terms of groundwater monitoring at the GRCA, we have over 60 long-term monitoring wells. And I think first and foremost is our partnership with the MECP for our provincial groundwater monitoring network. And we began this partnership with the province in the early 2000s. And those wells are shown in purple on the map. Then, through our work and our partnership with the OGS, where the OGS has drilled a lot of boreholes, we've worked with them to turn those boreholes into long-term monitors. And we have had monitors now for at least, I'm going to say about 13 years. So we're developing a nice data set with that as well. Those are shown in orange on the map. And then most recently, we've been working on an agreement with the region of Waterloo, where some monitoring wells, high quality monitoring wells, were drilled through a sub-watershed study. And now GRCA is going to be continuing long-term monitoring at these sites. So overall, the monitoring data from these individual wells is used for things like planning, groundwater models, and source water protection studies. So sort of these one-off studies. And so we've been thinking, how can we actually use this data at a watershed scale? Or, is there something more that we can do than just use the individual data from these sites? So the first step in all that was to actually understand what we're monitoring. So this actually speaks to what Riley was talking about earlier, and I'd love to talk to him a little bit more about his work. So because we were so fortunate in having the OGS do the work in the watershed, we took some of their hydrostratigraphic units or some of their stratigraphic units, and we're able to use this to actually line up this with the screened intervals from our monitoring wells to similar to what Riley's saying, group like wells and understand what we're actually monitoring. And these are a couple examples here. So we did this quite a few years ago, so I'm actually really looking forward to seeing the OGS's work on this. So once we started to have a good handle on what we're actually monitoring, and we have the beginnings of a decent monitoring record, we've been thinking lately about how we can actually communicate this data. So we've come up with two pilot projects. One is a groundwater conditions map that we've been working on, and the other one is looking at some near-time near real-time groundwater monitoring data for a couple of our PGMN sites. So starting with our pilot project number one are these groundwater conditions maps. So this is a very much a work in progress. It's a qualitative summary of groundwater conditions, and it's based on the USGS percentile method. And basically what it does is what I said here. It rolls up hourly data from each of our monitoring sites into a monthly median at each site. Then the monthly median is compared to the long-term monthly percentile at each site. And from that, we can then create the map. And this is what we came up with. So this is an example of monthly comparisons between years. So this is groundwater conditions maps for November of 2020, 2021, and 2022. And you can see in November 2020, we had a fairly standard year in terms of precipitation. Our groundwater levels were pretty straightforward in what we expected. 2021, it was a very unusual year in the Grand in terms of spring recharge. And by fall and into November, we could see that our groundwater levels were a little bit lower, even trending into November. This year, in November of 2022, we had a drought in the summer. It was definitely a drought year in the Grand River watershed. And our water levels, our groundwater levels, especially in the overburden, are trending very much on the low side into November. And you can see where I've circled some of those wells. Those are our lowest median water levels on record. So I always find that a little shocking when I see that. So another way that we can look at the data is a comparison across seasons. So here's our 2022 seasonal comparison of spring in April of 2022, where our water levels, we had a regular recharge this spring and our groundwater levels were right, pretty much where we'd expect them to be in terms of normal. In summer, we began to experience drought conditions. This was then reflected in our groundwater levels as they started to trend lower. And then again is that November 2022, where we can really see the impact of that summer drought on our regional groundwater monitoring. So next is just taking a look at the groundwater levels. I keep going back to this November map and comparing it to our 2022 precipitation. So this hydrograph is from one of our climate stations in the watershed, looking at data from 2020, 2021, and 2022 with monthly averages for precipitation. And in 2022, the Grand River watershed had 84% of normal precipitation, so 16% less than what we normally receive. And you can see that in the hydrograph for 2022, where the red line represents the long-term average, and you can see the monthly averages are generally below the long-term average. So it's interesting to see how that's reflected in the regional monitoring, and then how that's going to carry forward into the spring and what we'll see as we move into the spring months. So who's interested in this? I say besides me, who's our target audience? So first and foremost is our GRCA board. So with these maps, we've started to include them in our quarterly watershed conditions reports to our GRCA board. So generally, our watershed conditions contain a summary of surface water conditions, reservoir operations, and now we have a small section with the groundwater map and a write-up on groundwater conditions. This is also provided as information to our low water response team. So it's not a decision-making tool. The percentile categories that we have aren't used towards any decision-making. It's just for information only. And lastly is just to the general public, just because these are fairly easy to understand maps. So leaving the groundwater condition maps is our second pilot project, which is our near real-time data. So out of all of our PGMN wells, 2 of them have been equipped with GOES telemetry, and this has been funded by the MECP through the PGMN program. We have one well in the north, which is in the Guelph Formation up near Dundalk. And then we have our second well, which is down in the southwest in the Norfolk Sand Plain. And the well in the Norfolk Sand Plain responds very quickly. It's in an unconfined aquifer, so it responds quickly to precipitation events and also to drought events. So it's nice to have that in real time data. And then in addition to that, we also have 2 pending sites, one in the central portion of the watershed in the township of Puslinch, and another one that we're looking at down to the south near Cayuga. So where the ministry has installed the GOES telemetry, GRCA has equipped these sites with barrel loggers, and we're now streaming real-time hourly data for both the water level and the barrel logger data into GRCA's WSKI database. Then there, it's corrected to manual measurements and barometric pressure. So where are we going with all this? So the GRCA, just to step back a little bit, the GRCA currently posts for near real-time data for a range of climate variables, and that's available on our webpage. And the near real-time PGMN data is now added to this as well. So we now have a new tab in there under our real-time data for groundwater levels. And this is posted as provisional data, as is all of our near real-time data for GRCA, just to, basically errors make their way through. So this is just to recognize that. So lastly, to sum up, is just so we've had our 2 pilot projects, watershed groundwater conditions, which is the qualitative overview of groundwater conditions on a monthly basis. We also have our near real-time groundwater data, which is easily accessible. The goal of this was to provide easily accessible, up-to-date hydrographs and make them available on our website. And the overall objective of all of this, which was driving these pilot projects, was to have efficient, simple access to groundwater monitoring data and gear it towards both technical and really non-technical audiences. And that concludes my presentation. So thank you.